Okay, let's just dive right in. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a true masterpiece of modern American theater, August Wilson's Pulitzer-winning play, Fences. Set in the Hill District of 1950s Pittsburgh, this story, man, it runs incredibly deep. We're talking turbulent currents of race, family, and survival. But at its absolute core, it's really this profound look at legacy, and specifically the heavy, invisible burdens carried by women who sacrifice their own dreams just to hold their families together. Take a second and think about your own family tree. How exactly do the wounds of one generation shape the next? Just let that sit for a moment. Because when we talk about fences, we aren't just looking at some historical snapshot. We're looking at unhealed generational trauma. We're watching what happens when pain literally becomes an inheritance and how it just ripples out to impact everyone in its path. And honestly, that brings us right to the central metaphor. See, the unfinished fence in the Maxon family backyard, it isn't just a physical structure of wood. Throughout the play, this fence acts as the emotional center of gravity. It represents protective boundaries, for sure, but also emotional barriers and confinement. It's kind of the perfect metaphor for how we try to protect or, inadvertently imprison the ones we love the most. So let's meet the people actually living within these boundaries. Now, while the wounded, fiercely proud patriarch Troy takes up the most physical space, the true moral and emotional anchor of this whole ecosystem is his wife, Rose. Her strength, her sacrifice, that's the quiet engine of this entire play. Orbiting her, we've got Corey, who brings this youthful hope and resistance. Then there's Gabriel, Troy's brother, holding on to spiritual innocence despite his trauma, Lyons with his artistic ambition, and Bono, the loyal moral observer. But to really understand the immense pressure on this family, we first have to understand the gravity of Troy. Which brings us to Section 1, the tragedy of Troy Maxon. Troy is charismatic, he's larger than life, but he is deeply, deeply flawed. To understand his bitterness, we really have to look at the systemic racism that blocked his path and hardened his heart long before the play even starts. I mean, look at the weight of history here. Before Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball, Troy was a phenomenal athlete in the Negro Leagues. We're talking a league full of incredibly talented players whose stats totally rivaled or even outshone the white majors. But he was completely excluded strictly because of segregation. Now it's the 1950s. Instead of hitting home runs, he's working as a garbage collector in Pittsburgh, fighting just for the right to drive the truck instead of lifting the trash. So the crucial takeaway here is this. Systemic exclusion took a highly talented man and turned him into an angry, rigid figure who simply cannot separate his painful past from his present reality. It perfectly echoes Langston Hughes's famous question, what happens to a dream deferred? In Troy's case, it doesn't just fade away, it sours. His failed dreams literally fester into this oppressive emotional wall that he builds around his entire family. Moving on to Section 2, Building Fences, Family in Conflict. So we're shifting from the systemic sphere over to the domestic sphere. And this is where the female perspective, specifically Rose's worldview, truly commands the emotional center of the story. This is where Troy's past trauma collides head-on with his marriage. Notice the stark contrast in what a fence means to each of them. Troy's fence is all about control, right? It's built to keep the world out, representing these thick emotional walls. But Rose, she is the one desperately asking for the fence to be built, because for her, a fence is about protection. It's this profound, loving attempt to hold her family safely inside. She's operating from a place of deep emotional strength, desperately trying to knit together a family that's threatening to tear apart. And I have to say, nowhere is that female sacrifice more heartbreakingly articulated than right here. Midway through the play, Troy confesses to a devastating affair with a woman named Alberta, and he claims he just needed an escape from the heaviness of his life. Rose's response is incredibly powerful. She tells him, I planted myself inside you. It's such a stunning, gut-wrenching moment, and it speaks for generations of women. She sacrificed her own dreams, her own blossoming, for marriage and motherhood. She exposes all that heavy, invisible labor she poured into sustaining a man's world, even while he selfishly looked outside of it for his own freedom. The fallout from his actions is tragic. Alberta dies in childbirth, and Troy actually brings the motherless baby Rennell home. And here is where we see Rose's ultimate moral clarity. She agrees to raise the innocent baby, but she emotionally rejects Troy. She tells him that from now on, the child has a mother, but he is a womanless man. What I really want you to take away from this is that Rose raising Rennell is a profound act of moral strength and continuity. It is not passive forgiveness. She is firmly reclaiming her boundaries. Section 3. Fathers, Sons, and Rupture. That deep rupture in the marriage completely mirrors another massive fracture in the family, which is the explosive generational conflict between Troy and his teenage son, Corey. See, Corey represents everything Troy has lost: youth, hope, the very possibility of change. Let's walk through this tragic climax. First, Corey gets a college football scholarship. This is a real ticket to a different life, but Troy denies it. He simply doesn't trust America. He's convinced racism will crush Corey just like it crushed him. Second, the tension boils over and a physical altercation erupts between father and son. And finally, Troy kicks Corey out of the house. By projecting his own unhealed trauma onto his son, Troy wins the physical fight, sure, but he completely shatters the protective family sanctuary that Rose sacrificed her entire life to build, permanently rupturing their bond. Which brings us to our final section: legacy, forgiveness, and ambiguity. Years pass and Troy dies, offstage, from a heart attack. And the fact that his death happens offstage is super intentional. It shifts our focus. It's no longer about passing judgment on Troy's life. Instead, it becomes this exploration of what remains after he's gone. We're left with a very semi-open ending. On the resolved side, Troy's dead, the family gathers, and Corey ultimately attends the funeral. But on the unresolved side, is Corey fully healed? Is Troy actually forgiven? Is the family whole again? Well, not entirely. Initially, Corey refuses to go to the funeral, wanting to finally just break free of Troy's control. But it's Rose, once again acting as the moral center, who steps in. She reminds him that letting bitterness win is just another form of being trapped. Think about the complicated figures in your own life for a second. Do you let bitterness win? Corey has to decide what to do with a flawed man's legacy, and ultimately, he chooses the incredibly difficult path of understanding. And this leads us right to the play's deeply spiritual final moment. Gabriel, Troy's brain-injured brother, who truly believes he's an archangel, steps up to blow his trumpet to open the gates of heaven for Troy. But the trumpet fails, so instead, he cries out and performs this primal, harrowing dance. It creates this emotionally open, profoundly hopeful ending of transcendence. The gates open, but not through some perfect blast of a horn. They open through raw, human, spiritual effort. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question: was Troy redeemed? August Wilson deliberately doesn't give us a simple yes or no. Instead, he leaves us to ponder how we remember complicated human beings. People who aren't purely monsters or purely saints, but who pass on both immense love and immense damage. Unhealed pain can so easily become an inheritance. But, as Rose's incredible strength shows us, and as Corey eventually learns, the next generation always has the choice to finally begin the healing. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Think on that, and I'll see you next time.